So you've ridden your first century. What's next? Well, if you're finding centuries easy, you could try a double century. My daughter, Amber, her husband, Edgar, and I, Terry, are planning to ride the Grand Tour double century option at the end of June. My daughter just had a baby, so it's a fitness target for her. Edgar, seen here, has never ridden a double century, so it'll be a personal best for him. For me it's a challenge, 'cause I'm old. We're all going to find this challenging, so we need to train. The first thing to do is choose a good route. A double century is not twice as difficult as a century, it's harder than that. Find a supported ride with a route elevation profile that looks too easy. It won't be. Here's the route and the elevation profile for the lowland route. We chose it because it's the easiest and it's the best supported double century in Southern California. The beach path is surprisingly busy considering it's the middle of February, which has its advantages. You wouldn't believe it's 60 degrees Fahrenheit out, would you? This is our first training ride for the Grand Tour. Most of Edgar's recent rides have been 50 to 60 miles, and I believe each training ride should be no more than 50% longer than your prior training ride. So I put together an 80-mile route that has roughly the same rate of climbing as the double century. Our first stop was at 25 miles at the Crema in Seal Beach. It's important to balance nutritious and tasty food with speed. Yes, gas stations are the fastest, but they don't have toasted ham and brie baguettes. We got baguettes to go and used the trash can as our table. After eating, we headed inland on the San Gabriel bike trail, and we were lucky enough to join up with a group of strong and disciplined riders. They turned off after about 8 miles, but we really enjoyed the pull. We had to keep riding until we had 40 miles on our GPS units, which is about here. Heading back, we had quite a headwind, so we took turns to pull, shortening the intervals as the headwind grew stronger. The more familiar you are with the course, the easier it is to predict and deal with these kinds of issues. During the ride, I gave Edgar several tips. It's important to be comfortable being down on your aero bars for extended periods, especially when there's a headwind. But they also take the weight off your wrists and rotate your hips so the saddle pressure is now in a different place. I also explained the importance of standing when you can, and doing both of these things before your body starts complaining. Edgar's bike is new, and he's finding the riding positions a little more aggressive than he likes. He's used to a touring bike. He either needs to get comfortable with the new position, or raise his handlebars or his aero bars. This isn't difficult to do, but it's one of the reasons we do training rides. My target for this ride was a 12.5 mile an hour overall average. This would give us a 6.5 hour ride time. It's useful to monitor how closely you're riding to your target speed. For example, I would expect to arrive at a 100-mile control 8 hours after I started riding. You can't necessarily change your ride speed, but you can change the amount of time you spend at the controls. If you're very pushed for time, you can always grab food at the control and carry it with you to eat on the bike. Our second food stop was at mile 55 at the Bistro Saint-Germain, also in Seal Beach. We were 30 minutes ahead of schedule, so we decided to sit down and enjoy a nice meal. We split a grilled chicken sandwich with fries and a baguette with butter. Remember to keep your protein intake during the ride at a minimum and maximize your carbohydrates. Protein requires more resources to metabolize, and so it can upset your stomach. You should eat protein after the ride to rebuild muscle. On the way back it's warmed up to about 70 degrees, and it's even more crowded now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the middle of February. It's a beautiful day in the 70s with 10-mile-an-hour wind. This is why we live in Southern California. Now we turn inland for the last 13 miles. We have a slight tailwind, but Edgar's legs are starting to bother him. His quads are burning, which is a good thing. Over the next few days, they'll rebuild stronger. I'm thinking his next training ride will be 120 miles in about 3 weeks, but it's up to him. He needs to keep riding 50 and 60-mile rides until then. He also needs to decide if he can get used to the geometry of his new bike, or if he wants to put a new stem on it. Even with his quads burning, Edgar was still able to hold 15 miles an hour, and we finished 10 minutes earlier than my target time. Overall, it was a very positive training ride. Edgar went outside his comfort zone, but not by too much. Here's our final route, and the statistics, and the elevation profile. We spent more than an hour off the bike, and ideally that would have been more like half an hour. If this had been a timed ride, we would have made different food choices. But it's also important to do what you can to enjoy the ride.